misty mornings.
And good morning, vet Mark Evans checks out some neglected donkeys in the west
Blackberries
coast of
ready
Ireland
for
in the
eating.
first of his animal detective series.
Fungi.
The victim.
Birds flying to warmer lands. Fruit ripe for the harvest.
Hello. All of those pictures should have given you plenty of clues as to which season it is we're in now. Can you guess? It's autumn and time for the fruits that are ripened over the summer to be picked. And these apples are just some of the fruits that are ready for picking. And they're picked the way they always have been, by hand, by people like Nick here who's working behind me. The trees are nice and short so that the apples are quite easy to reach. And if I pick one and cut it in half for you, can you see inside, just there are tiny little seeds? Sometimes you call them apple pips. And if you planted those seeds, they could grow into a new apple tree. And different sorts of seeds will grow into different sorts of trees. Now, what have you found, Stuart? What have you got there?
Conkers.
And do you know what conkers are, Sophie?
Seed of a horse chestnut tree.
They're beautiful, aren't they? When you look at the conkers that you've got in your hands, what do you notice about them?
They're shiny and brown.
If you look at one side of the conker, it's the most beautiful, shiny, brown surface. But on the other side, look at that, it's got a rough patch. Oh, now you've got something interesting in your hand. What's that, Sophie?
It's a case of a conker.
And what does it feel like?
Spiky and very rough.
It's totally different from the seed, isn't it? Stuart, why do you think you might need a spiky casing on your seed?
So birds and animals won't get them.
That's right, so anything that might want to eat the conkers won't want to get spiked, will it? Where do we look for conkers?
Under a horse chestnut tree.
Always under the tree, don't we? No throwing sticks into the tree because you might actually damage it. But when the conkers are at their best, they come down to the ground, and that's when we can find them. Now, if you all stand up tall, what else can you notice about this horse chestnut tree?
It's got lots of colours on the leaves.
The leaves are changing colour, aren't they? They were dark green in the summer, and now look, what colours are they?
Yellow, green and brown.
And they're beginning to die from the outside. What will happen when they're dead?
They'll fall off.
They'll all fall off, but we don't need to worry because if we look here at the tips of the branches, what can you see?
Sticky bugs.
And those are going to be next year's leaves. Now, Stuart, what else might we be able to find in the woods in autumn?
Fungi.
Fungi, and they're super things to look for, aren't they? But what do you always have to be careful about with fungi?
Poison.
Some fungi can be poisonous, can't they? So we're going to put some rubber gloves on, then should we go and see what we can find?
Yeah.
Now, look at this. Isn't that beautiful? Now, do you know what this is?
Fungi.
It's a fungus, and this one is called the fly agaric. And it looks a bit like a mushroom shape, doesn't it? With this, which is the cap, and then there's a stalk underneath here. And both mushroom and toadstool are just other words for fungi. And do you want to just touch it? What can you feel?
Little white bump.
It's got little bumps on the surface, isn't it? It's lovely bright red colour. Can you see anything else, Lindsay?
You can see the gills through that hole.
There's a few holes in it, aren't there? And you can see, if I pick it, and I'll explain in a minute why I'm not hurting it by doing this. There we are, we pick it just gently. And let's look underneath. And can you see these very fine gills?
Yeah.
And those hold the fungus's spores. And the spores are a little bit like the fungus's seeds. And when the fungus is the right way up, the spores drop out onto the ground from those gills. Because this, the whole fungus, is what's called a fruiting body. If you imagine, like an apple tree has apples on it, doesn't it? Well, this is a bit like the fungus's fruit, and it's the only bit that you see sticking above ground. But underneath the ground, where we've taken the fungus from, you'll see lots of little fine white threads. You can just see one there on the tip of my finger. And those are part of the fungus's tree, its branches and its trunks, which spread out underneath the ground. So when you pick a fungus, you won't kill it, because most of it is under the ground, but you must never pick too many. And in this particular case, this one is very, very poisonous. Ah, now what do you think there might be just here? Look at this.
Well, speak for yourself. First of all,
Now,
let's
does
take a
anybody
look
know
at
what that
today's
is?
photo in the frame.
It's a pine cone that's got sticks pine.
It's the core of a pine cone, just like the core of an apple, and all the wings that make the pine cone with the seeds in have been stripped off. Do you know what might have done that?
Red squirrel.
A red squirrel, because there are very, very special squirrels in these woods, aren't there? And this is a sure sign that if we look hard, we'll find them. Come on. Red squirrels are much less common than the greys that you might see in towns and cities over much of this country. They're also much brighter colour, and they're slimmer and smaller. Normally you'd have a real job to see a red squirrel, but in this particular pine forest, people give them lots and lots of food, so there are lots and lots of red squirrels. Now, if you watch them very closely, you'll notice that as well as their lovely glossy red coat, they're growing beautiful bushy tails and just beginning to grow long ear tufts. And that's because they grow longer, thicker fur for the cold of winter. Come on, that's it, come on. You'll notice that each time the squirrel takes a nut away from me, he doesn't eat it, he takes it away and buries it in what's called a cache. And they do that because in the autumn there are lots of tree seeds and pine cones which the squirrels like to eat, but there won't be any in the winter. So he takes them away and buries them so he can eat them in the cold of the winter months. You see, many people think that squirrels hibernate, but in fact they don't. They simply can't put down enough fat to get them through the winter, so they have to have these little caches, otherwise they wouldn't survive. Other mammals do hibernate though, and one particularly fat little beastie is the hedgehog. This rolled up hedgehog here is an adult, and these others are almost fully grown now, and they're very active in the late summer and early autumn looking for worms and beetles and slugs to eat so they can get nice and fat in preparation for the winter. That's because once it's cold, their food's very difficult to find, so the hedgehogs will have to find somewhere nice and safe and cosy to roll up and sleep for the winter. They hibernate, and once they're hibernating, they don't eat at all. That's why they need all the fat. Now, hedgehogs don't just live out here in the countryside, they also live in towns and cities. So you could actually help your own local hedgehogs by putting out a plate of dog or cat food like we have here. Not bread and milk, it gives them a tummy ache, but dog or cat food's fine. In the morning, when you go out into the garden to see what's left on your saucer, there might be no food, but you won't necessarily know who's eaten it, because hedgehogs only tend to come out at night when we're all asleep. But just occasionally, you can see baby hedgehogs during the day. Now, this tiny baby hedgehog is much smaller than those adults. He's just 4 weeks old. And the problem for tiny little hedgehogs like this in autumn is that they just don't weigh enough. If they weigh less than 500 grams, that's half a kilogram, then they simply don't have enough fat to hibernate over the winter. And unfortunately, that means that quite a few hedgehogs do die during hibernation. There are other dangers for hedgehogs too. For example, they like to hibernate in little balls of leaves, which are nice and cozy for them. But the problem is, any pile of garden rubbish or even your bonfire seems like a very good place to them. So another way that you can help hedgehogs is to make sure that an adult checks the bonfire before it's lit to make sure there are no hedgehogs there. So autumn's a jolly good time for helping hedgehogs, isn't it? Tell me what you're doing with this, Catherine.
We're putting leaves on this strip with double-sided tape to make a bookmark.
So you've got lots of shreds of different coloured leaves. They're really pretty, aren't they?
Yeah.
And when you go home from the woods, that'll be a nice reminder of autumn, won't it? As we saw with the horse chestnut trees earlier, autumn is the time of the year when the leaves gradually change colour on some of the trees, and then they fall down to the ground. And if you wanted to collect some leaves, then wait until they come down onto the ground, and you'd be surprised how many different colours you can find. Autumn is the most beautiful time of the year, and even if you happen to live right in the heart of a city, you can still notice the leaves changing colour and feel the weather getting a bit colder. Perhaps you can look for some signs of autumn near where you are. Bye.